welcome to the Roads weekly webinar. Today's webinar is going to be on connecting to a SOAP backend service with using RhoSync. Excuse me. So what we're going to do is go to RhoHub and log into a RhoHub account. So when we log into our RhoHub account, we will then create a new application. So we'll let this load here. We'll just kind of close some of my previous projects. And so we'll create our new project here by doing the Create a New Project button. And we're going to call this Oracle CRM. And our demonstration today is going to be creating a SOAP adapter to connect to the CRM on demand backend. So we'll create a new project here. And it says, here's how you access your Roads app and your RhoSync app. You do a git clone. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our SSH key is stored on RhoHub, our SSH public key. So I have my public key here installed. So we'll go back to our dashboard and we'll copy this URL here and check out our Roads project by doing a git clone. And so that's gonna pull it down from RhoHub. We'll go back to RhoHub here and we'll also clone our RhoSync project. So now we have our Roads and our RhoSync project. We're going to go to our Roads project and open up our text editor. In our row config, you can see this is filled in the sync server, which is the sync server that's up on RhoHub. So that's the sync server that you would use. This sync server is automatically generated when you create a new application on RhoHub, and then when you click deploy, that's where your sync server is deployed. So in our Roads app, we're going to create a model. We're just going to do one of the models today. So we'll say RhoGen model. We'll call this our contact model. And we're going to give it two attributes. We'll give it contact full name and work phone. These correspond with the data fields that we're going to be getting out of the CRM backend. So once those are there, we'll go back to our editor. And in our app folder, we now have our contact model. And so we're just going to enable sync on this, save that, and go to our index page and put a link to our contact model in our index page. And save that. And so that's all we're going to be doing on our Roads app. So we're going to do now check in these changes that we just made. So if we do a git status, you can see we've added a few folders and modified one file. So we'll go ahead and add these folders. And then we'll also add index ERB. And then we'll commit them and then add contact model. Once we've committed them, we now need to push it back up to RhoHub. So we'll do a git push origin master. And that's going to push up all of our client changes to our RhoHub application. Now that we've done that, we're going to start working on our source adapter. So I'll go to our Oracle CRM Roads project. And what I'm going to do, since I've already created this application before, I'm just going to copy in the files because typing it in will take way too long to do from scratch. And there's several files here, so we'll just copy it from my previous folder, and then I will explain what this code is doing. So I have my old one here. We'll copy the application RB here. We'll copy the sources, which are our source adapters that we've created. We also need to copy our settings file. So there's no settings here originally. So we'll create it. Oh. So the problem is, actually, I'm in the Roads app, so that might be an issue. That's why there was no settings for us. So let's get rid of these files here. And we'll do it in the correct location. This looks a little bit better. Let's copy the application RB. Copy the settings file. Copy the sources. And there's actually one more file we need, which is a configuration file. So now let's open this up in our text editor as well. And we'll take a look at what this code is doing. The first part is in our application RB. Since we need to use the username and password to log in, when the authenticate method comes in, we need to store that value. And typically we do some authentication here, but since this is for just demo, we're just going to say true, which means authentication passed. We won't turn down a client because of username and password. But we do store it in the Redis store for later use. And because we're using a username and password key, this is really limiting it to one user. But for demonstration purposes on using SOAP, it will be sufficient. If we look at our settings file, we have our contact model with our poll interval. Our sources is where things get interesting here. So we have our contact source, which uses the WSSE authentication file, which is here. It uses the SOAP for RGEM, and it has these set of files: mapping WSDL, mapping driver, contact WSDL. This is generated by SOAP 4R. They have a application called WSDL to SOAP, or sorry, WSDL to Ruby. And we can actually pull that up here and take a look and go to WSDL to Ruby. And so what happens is you run the WSDL to Ruby and you point it to your WSDL location, and then it generates these files that allow you to interact with that WSDL service. So if we take a look here, these are auto-generated files that connect to the attributes that are defined in your WSDL and is generated and gives you various accessors and methods to connect to that. In our contact.rb, we have our login method. And what our login method is doing is using the mapping service to get the display names of the fields. The reason why it's in the login method here is because the login gets called before each method, and it's potential that the names have changed on our CRM service. So in our CRM service, if somebody goes and changes the fields, this gives you the proper field names. If you have something that's not changing as often, or you don't expect it to change at all, you could easily put it in your authenticate method, which is called only when the user logs in. But since the CRM allows you to change these on the fly, we want to make sure every time that we sync we have the correct list. Once that has completed, if you're doing a query, then the query method in RhoSync is called. So we have a method here to load our configuration, which is this XML file here. So if we take a look at that, the XML file has our endpoint URL and our configuration. So that's what we're going to be pulling out, is the endpoint URL that we're going to be contacting for the SOAP service. And you can see we get the endpoint URL out of our SOAP service here, or out of our config file here. Then we initialize our WSDL object with that URL, and we generate an authentication header, and we're using the values that we've stored in our authenticate method. So if we look back at our application RB, we're storing two keys. We're storing a user key and a password key. In our contact RB, we're pulling out these two keys, user and password. After we've done that, we also generate the query that we're going to be using. And using the list of display names that we got here in our login method, we're going to build a query that pulls out all of the names that we want to get. And so basically what this is doing is you get all the names that are available and then says we want to fetch all of those names. So once we've defined our endpoint, our username, our password, and the fields that we're getting, we need to define the records that we're getting. So we define our search spec that queries for all contacts. Once we do that, we then execute the list of contact query methods with our query, and it returns us the object here, input, and we get the list of contacts here. And it says we're going to get our contact query input and the lists that we want to retrieve. Then we get our output here. And in the output, we now go through all of the entries and set the keys to get the instance variable here for each object in our display name. And so this is how you get the variables out of your SOAP response. Is you have all the names that you want to get, and we're pulling out the key and putting it into a separate hash entry. Once we've done that, we put it into our result hash, which is the standard RhoSync result hash, where you have the ID and the hash. And when that's created, it will output the message synced X contact entries. So that's how our query method is working. So let's put that up on RhoHub and deploy our application. So what we need to do is we go to our URL here, and we're going to do a get status and see what our modified files are. So we have our application RB, our settings YAML, config files added, and our sources folder. So we'll go ahead and do a git add on each of these. So with the commit here, we're going to give it a comment here, add contact source. And so one thing we need to mention is that since we're using SOAP for our gem, it's a new gem that is used. So for RhoHub, we need to tell it that we want to use this extra gem. So there's a file here which doesn't show up in TextMate because it hides dot files. So open up and there's a file called .gems. You always need to have RhoSync in here because it's a RhoSync application. And since we're using SOAP for R, we need to put in SOAP for R in our list. And then we'll do a commit on add on the .gems. And then we'll do a commit on that as well. Add SOAP for R to .gems. Now that we've done our commits, we can now push it up to RhoHub. by doing a git push origin master. And what it's doing right now is it's uploading this file that we just created, and all of the WSDL files and our sources is now being put onto RhoHub. Once that process has completed, then we'll be able to deploy our RhoSync application. So while that's running, I'm going to go ahead and open up our, we'll open up the Oracle CRM on demand. So let me find my URL here.
You have to use Firefox.
Firefox. Right, so one of the requirements actually is using Firefox with Oracle CRM Demand. So let's go and get Firefox right now.
Okay.
Actually, let's just say get Firefox.
If you want, you can just hand me the screen at the end of your demo, and I'll show the data from. If you want, it's up to you.
Okay. So we'll take a look here. That's still running. Go back to our Safari, and this is going rather slow. So now that that is back up on RhoHub, we can go back to our RhoHub page, and we have our Oracle CRM application here, so we can click Deploy. It tells us that this application currently is not deployed, and then click Deploy and it'll be running. So when we click Deploy, it starts the deploy task. This task is now allocating the resources for our application and will be starting a RhoSync server. So it takes a minute or two to allocate the resources, but when that is completed, it'll come back and our status will be updated. So while it's running, we're going to continue to download Firefox. So that process is going. We'll take a look at our Oracle CRM status here. So that's still deploying. But while it's deploying, we can do other tasks. So we're just going to hit close right now. And so that's deploying. We're going to go ahead and build an Android version of this application as well. So we have our Roads app here on the left and a build button. So we'll go to our build button and we'll say we want to build something for Android 2.2. And we'll create that. So that's sending it off to the build system to create a build, which also takes a couple minutes because it has to be sent to a machine, it has to be built with the SDK, and then deployed back. So that will again come back to us in a few minutes. And if you notice, while we're doing that, our deploy button here has turned green. And so if we open this up, we can see it has been completed and the deployment is finished. So we'll go ahead and close that, and we can look at our log file from our application. So if we select that, it'll load the log and display it here. So something actually happened with our problem here. It says here, no such file to load config ERB. So what happened was I had forgotten to add one of the files that we created, but we now see the message here. So we'll go ahead and close that and go back to our deploy page and undeploy that and say, no, made a mistake, let's not do that. And close that. So to fix that, we just need to copy the load config, which is what actually loads the configuration. And I forgot to copy this file, so let's copy that over. Take a look at our stats. It says we need to add a file, and then we'll commit that file. And then we'll push that back up to RhoHub. We'll go back to our Safari, and Firefox has finished uploading. So we're going to copy it to our applications folder. Our git push is finished, so we're going to go back to RhoHub and redeploy our application. And so while that's processed, let's open our newly installed Firefox. So now that that is there, we're going to go ahead and go to our Oracle CRM demand. That's still deploying, but if you look at our build button screen, that means our build task is finished. And so it says here is completed and gives us a list to download the zip file. So while that is running, we will download our zip file as well. The zip file contains our Android application, which we can install to a device or to our Android simulator. So while that is going, we'll go back and see if this is logged. So it's asking for our login and password. So we will put our credentials here. And sign into our Oracle CRM on demand.